Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I had the pleasure of texting with Councillor Kitts a little bit last night about what we were seeing, and I just would like to understand sort of the process by which some of these sites become online. Can we walk through how this happens, right? So this lot had it was called development reserve, right? So it was being held for development. It is owned by the applicant at that time, or is it just something that's identified within our own boundary?
It may or may not be owned by the same person that brings forward a development proposal.
Okay, so we have we'll use the example of this particular application, obviously. So we have this parcel of land. It's being held until we can have the services, anticipated for infrastructure. So with respect to stormwater management and those types of underground systems. Once we can foresee that those hookups are possible, then how does this application come to us?
So there is a very straightforward process to lift a holding provision once the requirements of the hold have been met. It's a bylaw is taken straight to council and listed on the bylaws to do that. But there is an application process, a very straightforward one, to lift a hold. So they can't pull the building permit until that hold is lifted.
Okay, so we remove the hold. The applicant puts forward a proposal like this. Yep, go ahead.
They would typically put forward a site plan proposal before they would apply to lift the hold, or in concert with lifting the holding provision.
Okay.
But they would go through that process through site plan, and I believe this one will go through site plan to look at how the site functions, the landscaping, all of those types of things. In this area, they could also go through a plan of subdivision on some of these sites that are development reserve instead of a site plan, because some of these sites are large and will ultimately be developed through subdivision as opposed to planned unit development or something that triggers a need for site plan.
So have there ever been a circumstance where the city has said, we can anticipate the servicing on site, so under these circumstances we would lift the hold, but the transportation planning is so lags or there's such a gap that we will actually keep the hold on until we can see some of the transportation infrastructure come into place?
When we're dealing with piped infrastructure, the capacity is very finite. And if there are, if we exceed the capacity of a piped infrastructure, there are, immediate ramifications with respect to basement flooding or lack of pressure in a water system or things like that. With respect to transportation infrastructure, and to build on the question that Councillor Kitts was asking previously, I'm not aware of any developments that have been refused due to overall network capacity. The capacity isn't defined as finitely as the capacity of a pipe. The cars will get through the system. It will take longer, and that's the approach that we've taken on transportation. And to this point, I'm not aware of any instances where we have refused an application or left it in limbo due to transportation capacity on a network scale. Often the TIAs will identify improvements that are needed more locally to that development, whether it's a turn lane in or an intersection improvement, things like that we would then work with the developer to implement, to improve the situation or at least not worsen it. I hope that answers your question.
I mean, it does answer my question in the sense that, we do know that eventually the network will allow for cars to pass through. I think right now we have a circumstance where we have a councillor who is essentially begging for alternative transportation options in her ward. So she's not, I don't mean to speak on your behalf, but I don't hear the councillor advocating for greater car capacity in this instance neither. We have a transit, like the TIA for this report was a bit of a horror show, if I can say. Like it had collisions, it had an unsignalized left turn, it was demonstrating that an intersection will fail. It will, it was like a bingo card of things that could go wrong with the transportation options for this neighborhood. And I don't mean to call into question anyone's integrity, but what I'm suggesting is perhaps these, if we have never refused an application on the basis of a TIA, have we ever considered not doing TIAs at all? I think that sometimes that might feel more honest and transparent to the residents that are being served by these neighborhoods.
We do have thresholds of development that don't require TIAs on some larger developments where they do trigger the need. I think the staff perspective is that they provide value and that they identify improvements that could be made and recognize at the same point that overall network capacity issues are typically not the responsibility of an individual developer, but of the city through development charges and the transportation master plan to meet those capacity expectations over time. And I've had conversations with the ward councilor on this as well, and I think there are capacity issues in the East End that are, expected to be identified or worked through the transportation master plan, and over time through the development charges and funding becoming available to implement some of the changes identified. But we typically don't look to individual developments to solve overall network capacity issues.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think that residents and councillors are feeling frustrated by the fact that these TIAs don't talk to each other. And if you look at an intersection like Merivale, Clyde, and Maitland, we have, up to, I think, 17 different applications along that stretch between 3 wards. And we have, only through the collaboration and communication of ward councillors sometimes do we know what's happening on either side of Merivale. So we have a concern here, and I don't know what the solution is, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate to let this moment pass by. I don't see, as you say, the merits to refuse the application upon transportation, but I want to see this council and this committee and transportation committee certainly get their butts in gear to get some of this transportation options out to these areas, because they are absorbing so much of our development, and we want them to, but we need to champion active and multimodal transportation in those areas. Otherwise, this is just bad planning. Thank you.